The clatter of silverware and the hum of conversation faded when he reached for my hand. I had spent the entire day convincing myself that tonight would be the beginning of something solid, something lasting. I watched his face as he lifted his glass, searching for reassurance in the small lines around his eyes, the familiar curve of his mouth. The room was full: family, friends, people who had flown in from other cities just to witness us promise forever. Laughter echoed from the next table, a cousin's joke about childhood memories. But all I could hear was the rush of my own heartbeat. He leaned closer, his voice low, meant only for me. I waited for the words I had imagined so many times, the ones that would anchor me to this moment. Instead, he whispered her name, not mine, her name, soft and certain, as if it belonged to this night, as if it belonged to him. For a second, I thought I had misheard. I wanted to believe it was nerves, a slip, a joke I didn't understand. But his eyes didn't meet mine. He stared at the tablecloth, at the untouched bread, at anything but me. No one else noticed. The speeches continued, glasses raised, cameras flashed. I sat frozen, a smile still fixed in place, every muscle in my body tensed against the urge to run. My mind raced backward. Late-night calls he said were work, the sudden silences, the way he turned away when I reached for him. I wondered if everyone else could see it now, the fracture running right through the center of us. I finished my wine in one long swallow, the taste sharp and unfamiliar. I set the glass down with a steadiness I didn't feel. I stood, smoothing the fabric of my dress, and walked out of the hall. No one stopped me. No one called my name. The doors closed behind me, muffling the music and laughter, leaving me alone in a corridor that smelled faintly of flowers and something else, something like regret. I kept walking, past the coat check, past the photographs of other couples smiling in the same space, past the memories I thought we were building together. My phone buzzed in my bag, a message from my mother, a friend asking where I'd gone. I ignored them all. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want to be comforted. I wanted to be anywhere but here, anywhere but the girl who had been left behind by a single word. Outside, the air was cooler, the streetlights harsh and indifferent. I walked until the noise of the city replaced the noise in my head. I tried to remember the last time I had felt certain, the last time I had believed in us without question. I couldn't. Every memory now felt suspect, every promise tinged with doubt. I found a quiet corner at a cafe, ordered another glass of wine, and stared at my reflection in the window. I didn't cry, not yet. I watched the people passing by, couples holding hands, friends laughing, strangers living lives untouched by the disaster of my evening. I wondered how many of them had ever felt this kind of loneliness, this sudden, sharp unraveling of everything they thought was true. The waiter asked if I was waiting for someone. I shook my head. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was done waiting for explanations, for apologies, for a version of love that was only half mine. I finished my drink, paid the bill, and stepped back into the night. My wedding dinner already a story I would never tell the way I had hoped. I walked with no destination, letting the city swallow me. I thought about calling someone, about finding comfort in a familiar voice. But the words felt heavy and useless. I wanted silence. I wanted space to feel the full weight of what had happened, to understand what it meant to be chosen second, to be the name forgotten. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion had settled deep in my bones. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my dress, and let the quiet fill the room. I thought about him, about the way he had looked at me across the table, about the name he had whispered. I wondered if he knew what he had done, if he would try to fix it, if there was anything left to fix. I didn't have answers. I only had the certainty that I couldn't go back, not to that table, not to that version of myself. I had walked out, and for now, that was enough. He didn't come after me. Not when I left the table, not when I stepped into the empty corridor, not when I pressed the elevator button with a trembling hand and waited, feeling the weight of every eye in the room behind me. I remember the taste of wine on my tongue, sharp and metallic, and the way my pulse thudded in my ears as I walked out of the hall that was meant to celebrate us. I walked away from the music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, and into a silence that felt like truth. My phone buzzed as I reached the street. I thought, for a moment, it would be him. But it was my mother, her message a blur of concern and confusion. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I kept walking, heels in hand, dress trailing behind me, until the city swallowed the noise of the wedding and left me alone with the echo of her name. I tried to remember the last time I had felt chosen, truly seen, and not just a placeholder in someone else's story. I couldn't remember. I found a bench at the edge of a small park, sat down, and let the night air cool the heat in my cheeks. I replayed the moment, the way his lips shaped her name, soft and unguarded, as if it belonged to him. I wondered how many times he had whispered it before, in dreams, in private, in the spaces between us that I had never been able to fill. I wondered if he even realized what he had done, or if it was just another slip, another truth he thought he could hide behind ceremony and vows. I scrolled through my messages, looking for something to anchor me. Friends sent congratulations, photos, jokes about the future. No one knew what had happened. No one saw the crack in the perfect evening. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but I couldn't find the words. What do you say when your life unravels in public? When the person you trusted most reveals a stranger's name at the moment meant for you? I sat there until my feet ached and my phone battery blinked red. I thought about going home, about locking the door and letting the world shrink to the size of my apartment. But I couldn't face the silence, the questions, the reminders of what was supposed to be. Instead, I booked a room at a small hotel, handed my card to the clerk with a numb smile, and let myself disappear for a night. In the room, I stared at my reflection. Mascara smudged, lipstick faded, hair pinned in a style chosen for photographs. I looked like someone else's bride, someone else's dream. I slipped out of the dress, folded it carefully, and placed it on the chair. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the tears come, quiet and controlled, as if I could manage the grief by rationing it. I thought about him, about the years we had spent together, the promises made and broken, the quiet compromises that had become routine. I remembered the first time he said he loved me, the way it felt like a rescue. I remembered the small doubts I had ignored, the moments when I felt him drift, the way he avoided talking about the future in any detail. I wondered if I had always known, somewhere deep down, that I was not the only one in his heart. I tried to imagine what he was doing now. Was he searching for me, calling my name, or was he still at the table, explaining away the mistake, laughing it off with friends and family? Was he thinking of her, the woman whose name had slipped past his lips, or was he regretting everything? I wanted to believe he was sorry, that he would come looking for me, that this was a mistake we could recover from. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I wanted him to. I picked up my phone and typed a message. I heard you. I stared at the words, then deleted them. I typed again. You said her name, delete. I tried to find the right combination of anger and sadness, something that would make him understand the depth of the wound. In the end, I put the phone down and let the silence answer for me. The night stretched on. I lay awake, replaying every moment of our relationship, searching for signs I had missed. I thought about the wedding, the months of planning, the excitement that had slowly turned to anxiety. I thought about the future we had imagined, the life we were supposed to build together. I wondered if any of it had been real. In the morning, I woke to a new kind of exhaustion, the kind that settles in your bones and makes every movement feel heavy. I checked my phone, no messages from him, only more congratulations, more well wishes from people who had no idea what had happened. I thought about telling someone, about breaking the illusion, but I couldn't bring myself to share the shame. I showered, dressed in yesterday's clothes, and left the hotel. I walked through the city with no destination, letting the crowds swallow me. I tried to imagine a life beyond this moment, a version of myself that could move forward. I thought about the choices I had, the freedom that came with loss. I wasn't sure what I wanted, but I knew I couldn't go back. By midday, I found myself at a cafe we used to visit. I ordered coffee, sat by the window, and watched the world move on. I thought about calling my mother, about explaining everything, but the words caught in my throat. I realized I was still waiting for him to reach out, to apologize, to fight for us. But as the hours passed, hope faded. I opened my journal and began to write, not about him, but about myself, about the woman who walked out of her own wedding, who chose dignity over denial. I wrote about the pain, the anger, the strange relief that came with the end of pretending. I wrote about the possibility of starting over, of finding a new path. As the day turned to evening, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, raw and aching, but it was joined by a flicker of resolve. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I would face it on my own terms. For the first time in a long while, I felt the faintest glimmer of hope. And as I closed my journal, I promised myself this: I would not let his mistake define me. I would not be the woman left behind, the afterthought. I would be the one who walked out, who chose herself, who found strength in the ashes of disappointment. The story was no longer about him. It was about me, and the life I would build from here. Morning brought no clarity, only the dull ache of disappointment and the relentless hum of unanswered questions. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the sheets tangled around my legs, replaying the night in my mind. The world outside moved on, indifferent to the fracture in my life. My phone was silent, no calls, no messages from him, only a few friends checking in, their words bright and oblivious, as if nothing had changed. I ignored them, unwilling to break the illusion for anyone else. I forced myself into the shower, letting the water run until my skin felt raw. I dressed in yesterday's clothes, the wedding dress folded and hidden in the closet, a relic of a life that no longer belonged to me. I left the hotel without looking back, walking aimlessly through streets that felt both familiar and foreign. Every shop window, every passing couple, seemed to mock the certainty I had lost. I found myself at the small bakery where we used to meet on weekends, the smell of fresh bread and coffee tugging at memories I didn't want. I ordered a coffee, sat by the window, and tried to anchor myself in the present. The chair across from me was empty. I wondered if he was sitting somewhere, thinking of me, or if he had already begun rewriting our story to fit a version that hurt less. A message finally appeared on my phone. His name on the screen made my stomach twist. "Can we talk?" Simple, direct, as if a conversation could undo the damage. I stared at the words, fingers hovering over the keyboard, searching for a response that would make sense of the chaos. I typed, deleted, typed again. In the end, I sent nothing. I wasn't ready to hear his voice, to listen to apologies shaped by guilt rather than understanding. I spent the day drifting through the city, avoiding places that held too many memories. I let myself feel the anger, the betrayal, the sharp sting of humiliation. I thought about the years we had spent together, the plans we had made, the future I had imagined. I wondered if any of it had been real, or if I had built my happiness on a foundation already cracked. By afternoon, I found myself in the park, watching children chase each other across the grass. Their laughter was unburdened, free from the weight of expectations and broken promises. I envied their innocence, their ability to live in the moment without fear of disappointment. I closed my eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to trust so easily. My phone buzzed again. Another message from him. "Please, I need to explain." The words felt empty, stripped of meaning by repetition. I wanted to hear the truth, but I was afraid of what it might cost me. I was afraid that forgiveness would mean accepting less than I deserved. As the sun dipped behind the buildings, I made my way home. The apartment was quiet, untouched since the morning of the wedding. The flowers on the table had begun to wilt, their petals curling inward. I sat in the silence, letting the grief settle around me. I thought about calling my mother, about letting her hold the pieces of my pain, but I couldn't bring myself to speak the words out loud. Instead, I wrote. I poured everything into the pages of my journal: the anger, the sadness, the questions that had no answers. I wrote about the moment he whispered her name, about the way the world shifted beneath my feet. I wrote about the decision to walk out, to choose myself over the comfort of denial. The words came in a rush, raw and unfiltered, a lifeline in the emptiness. Night fell, and still I wrote. I wrote until the pain dulled, until the ache became something I could carry. I wrote until I started to see the outline of a future that didn't depend on him, a future where I could be whole on my own. The act of writing became an act of defiance, a way to reclaim the narrative of my life. I closed the journal, exhaustion, pulling at my limbs. I lay in the darkness, listening to the city outside, and realized I was no longer waiting for him to call. I was no longer hoping for a message that would make everything right. I had walked out of my own wedding, out of the life I thought I wanted, and into the unknown. For the first time, I felt a flicker of pride. I had survived the worst night of my life, and I was still standing. Tomorrow, I would decide what came next. Tonight, I would let myself rest. I didn't expect to hear from him again, not after the silence that stretched between us like a warning. Yet, 2 days after I walked out, his name appeared on my phone, a message blinking in the early hours. "I want to talk. Please." I stared at the screen, the words blurring as old anger and new exhaustion tangled inside me. I didn't reply. I knew that nothing he could say would erase what I'd heard, or the way it had hollowed out the future I thought we shared. But the message lingered in my mind, a challenge to the boundaries I was trying to build. I spent the day pacing my apartment, replaying every conversation, every moment when I'd chosen to believe him over my own doubts. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask why my love had never been enough. I wanted to know if he'd loved me at all, or if I was always just a shadow behind someone else's name. By evening, I gave in and called him. The line rang twice before he picked up, his voice small and uncertain. He started with apologies too, many too late. He tried to explain, to paint the mistake as a slip, a ghost from his past that meant nothing. I listened, numb, as he spoke of confusion, of pressure, of memories that refused to fade. He said he was sorry. He said he wanted to fix things. I felt the old urge to comfort him, to make sense of his pain. But I stopped myself. I realized I was tired of being the one who forgave, who patched up the cracks and called it healing. I told him I needed honesty, not excuses. I asked about her, the woman whose name he whispered when he should have been seeing only me. He hesitated, then admitted he'd never truly let go of her, that she was a wound he'd never allowed to heal. He said he thought marrying me would help him move on, that I was safe, kind, reliable. The words stung, but they also set me free. I saw, with sudden clarity, that I'd been chosen not for who I was, but for what I represented: a promise of stability, a balm for someone else's heartbreak. I told him I deserved more than to be someone's second choice, more than to be a stand-in for a love that never ended. He cried, begged for another chance, but I felt the last threads of hope unravel. After the call, I sat in the quiet, letting the finality settle. The anger burned, but beneath it was something steadier, a sense of self-respect I hadn't felt in years. I realized closure wouldn't come from him or from any apology he could offer. It was something I had to find for myself in the decision to walk away and not look back. 12. The next morning, I wrote a letter I never intended to send. I poured out everything: my grief, my disappointment, my hope that he would one day understand the cost of his choices. I ended it with a promise to myself: I would not let this betrayal define me. I would not let his unfinished story become the shape of my life. I started to reclaim small things. I reached out to friends I'd neglected, let them see the cracks and the pain. Their support was quiet, steady, a reminder that I was not alone. I began to fill my days with new routines, new places, letting the city become mine again. Not just a backdrop for memories I wanted to forget. There were moments when the sadness felt endless, when loneliness pressed in, and I wondered if I'd made a mistake. But each time, I reminded myself of the truth I'd learned. Healing was not about erasing the past, but about refusing to let it control the future. 123. I allowed myself to grieve, to feel the loss, but I also allowed hope to return in small, cautious ways. I wasn't ready to imagine a new love, or even a new version of myself, but I was ready to believe that I could survive this, that I could build something stronger from the ruins. I was learning, slowly, to trust my own voice again, to recognize my own worth, and to let go of the need for answers that would never satisfy. As the days passed, the ache softened. I found comfort in the ordinary, in the act of choosing myself each morning. I knew the road ahead would not be easy, that scars would linger, but I also knew that I was no longer the woman who waited for someone else to choose her. I was the woman who walked out, who faced the truth, and who began, at last, to heal. The days moved forward, quietly, without ceremony. I learned to wake without expecting a message, to fill my mornings with small rituals, coffee brewed just the way I liked, a walk through streets that no longer felt haunted. The ache was still there, sometimes sharp, sometimes dull, but it no longer dictated the rhythm of my life. I allowed myself to remember, but not to dwell. I let the past be what it was, a chapter closed, a lesson learned at a cost I could now accept. I started reaching out, not for answers, but for connection. Friends I hadn't seen in months became lifelines, their laughter and patience a gentle reminder that my world was bigger than one broken promise. I told the story in pieces, never the whole thing at once, and each time I spoke it aloud, it lost a little of its power over me. I saw the concern in their eyes, the quiet outrage, but also a kind of pride. I had walked away. I had chosen myself. Work became a refuge, a place where my worth was measured by effort and ideas, not by the ability to forgive or forget. I took on new projects, stayed late when I wanted to, left early when I needed space. My colleagues noticed the change, some offering support, others keeping a respectful distance. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. My life was mine to rebuild, and I was learning to trust my own judgment again. One evening, after a long day, I found myself at the same cafe where I had gone the night everything changed. The waiter recognized me, offered a smile, remembered my usual order. I sat by the window, watching the city move, and realized I was no longer waiting for someone to join me. I was enough, just as I was. The certainty was quiet, but it was real. I began to write again, not just in my journal, but stories, ideas, fragments of hope. The words came slowly at first, then faster, as if they had been waiting for permission. I wrote about loss, about resilience, about the courage it takes to begin again. I wrote not for him, not for anyone else, but for myself. Each page was a step away from the woman I had been, a step toward the woman I was becoming. There were setbacks, moments when the loneliness felt overwhelming, when I questioned every decision, when I missed the comfort of old routines. But I learned to sit with the discomfort, to let it pass without reaching for something or someone to fill the space. I learned that healing was not a straight line, but a series of small choices, made over and over until they became habit. Months passed. The wedding dress remained folded in the back of my closet, no longer a symbol of failure, but a reminder of strength. I didn't need to get rid of it. I didn't need to keep it. It was simply there, part of a story that had shaped me but did not define me. I saw him once, by chance, on a crowded street. Our eyes met for a moment, and in that brief exchange, I felt no anger, no longing, just a quiet recognition of all that had changed. He smiled, uncertain, and I nodded, then kept walking. There was nothing left to say. The past was behind us, and I was free. In time, new possibilities emerged. I opened myself to friendships, to new experiences, to the idea that happiness could be found in unexpected places. I didn't rush. I didn't force anything. I let life unfold, trusting that I was strong enough to handle whatever came next. Looking back, I saw not just the pain, but the growth. I saw a woman who had walked out of her own wedding dinner, who had faced betrayal and chosen dignity, who had rebuilt her life piece by piece. I saw resilience, not just as a word, but as a way of living. And as I closed another day, I felt gratitude for the lessons, for the freedom, for the chance to begin again. I was no longer defined by someone else's mistake. I was the author of my own story, and for the first time in a long while, I looked forward to what came next.